Climate change is expected to cost Singapore some $100 billion over the next 100 years. And to help combat the effects of climate change, Minister Heng has introduced a number of sustainability measures in his budget speech.
For both public health and climate change reasons, we should progressively phase out the use of ICE vehicles towards cleaner alternatives such as hybrids and EVs. We'll set a long-term strategic goal for Singapore to achieve this. Our vision is to phase out ICE vehicles and have all vehicles run on cleaner energy by 2040.
And some $5 billion has been set aside for the Coastal and Flood Protection Fund to protect against rising sea levels. That's quite a hefty investment. Vikram, what are your thoughts?
Yes, but it's, I think the total investment is what, 100 billion?
100 billion.
100
over
billion
100 years.
100 billion over 100 years.
Over 100 years.
So this is just the
so
start.
This is a down payment. This is a very small down payment.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a super long-term project. But yeah, I mean, it has to go ahead. I mean, this is, I mean, rising sea levels are a fact of life. And it's going to continue. So I think we have no choice. But maybe we should also explore technologies such as what the Dutch in the Netherlands, what do? They face the same problem. Maybe they can, is it possible to do it less expensively? So that's another thing. But among all the measures, I was really encouraged by the incentives for EV adoption. I mean, Singapore has surprisingly low EV adoption. I mean, by EVs, I mean, include also hybrids, right?
Yeah.
So it's surprisingly low, and the price point for hybrids is really not as low as it should be. I mean, it should be subsidized. These things should be subsidized. So I'm really delighted to see that there's a
and an increase
45% rebate.
Charging stations as well, I
and
think will
charging
definitely
stations.
help.
At the moment, if you can only have an electric car really practically if you live in a landed property.
Yeah.
If you don't live in a landed property, it's a bit of a struggle to find charging points, right? So if that changes, I think the whole situation with the car ownership here will change.
Yeah,
but they have the equivalence of the fuel subsidy that fuel excise duties that they collect, right?
Yeah,
and
they
in
have
order
a revenue problem, right?
Yeah, they have the revenue problem. Then it again, in a way, when I look at it, it kind of defeats the first incentive that you have mentioned when they have this lump sum tax that's thrown on it. So like for like, it's in a way it kind of neutralizes each other, right?
Yeah.
If any.
Tackling this climate change risk is also a show of our commitment to the Paris Agreement. And this carbon footprint is always features in every budget discussion, I think, going forward. So my view is that if the world will be looking at us, Singapore being a small country, how we tackle this climate change issue, it will have a longer impact on how people want to lead their quality life going forward. And it may even escalate to how you attract global talent to work in Singapore if you can manage this issue, which is very close to a lot of young people's heart. And that will really put Singapore in a good light. You know, if you can tackle this issue, have a well thought through plan in the long run to tackle this issue. No doubt I agree with you. It's expensive, 100 billion over 100 years. That's where it will be a strain on our fiscal surplus or kitty. But from the environmental part of this is where I think the GST will come into good use, and also maybe other form of taxes that can come along.
Just to clarify though, in the last budget, I think the finance minister said that these longer-term infrastructural development projects will probably be funded through borrowings because some of the benefits accrue to future generations. So you don't want to tap the whole sum from current generations. So I suppose you could set aside each year from the budget, something towards the 100 billion, but there's also other ways of financing that infrastructural development that would be, would be more equitable.
And I think we've got a question in from social media, a comment in on social media. Dylan, what's the latest?
Well, thanks, Rachel. Now, sustainability is quite a talked about topic on our social media. Let's see, we have a comment here from Kumar H, who says on Facebook, if the car population is pegged at zero growth, then promoting EV vehicles with lower taxes will be beneficial. Of course, if the objective is to make car ownership punitive, then it's not worth it. Back to you, Rachel.
That's a interesting comment. What are your thoughts?
No, I'm just reflecting that there's a lot of my friends who say we're not going to own cars anymore. I mean, because the
transportation systems,
including Grab and Gojek and things like that, and private car hires are so good, and the MRT is continuing to expand. And a lot of people who don't own cars say that life is fine, even when they don't live near an MRT. So I think that option is going to expand. So I suspect that I don't think the intention is to make car ownership punitive as such. It's just to make it cleaner and more efficient.
And nowadays people don't buy co-sharing houses, cars, So I think the car population will get smaller.
There's quite a lot of public purse being expended on expanding the MRT system.
Yes.
So remember, from 2013 to 2030, the MRT system is going to be doubled. So I think that to Vikram's point, it's going to make it less relevant that you have your own car unless you had a family to take care of, lots of groceries and the kids that we all need. Then you would have a need for point-to-point, but in which case you have the co-sharing and the sharing economy kick in as well.
Yeah.
So it's quite a lot of public money going to public infrastructure.
Yes, which is good.
Yes.
And so it will take us to a situation like in New York, where a lot of people just don't have cars. They just, I mean, for one thing, parking in New York is ridiculous. Traffic ridiculous, and people live quite happily without cars. And this is true of several cities, and I think it's going to be increasingly true of Singapore.
So it'll be interesting to see the EV take up after this initiative. Now we've spoken about the $5 billion investment and what's happening with EV vehicles. We also saw the launch of an ESG eco fund to community partnerships on sustainability issues, which I think is interesting to see more initiatives grow up from the community. Gillian, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's the general sort of Singapore Together movement, but certainly you have a lot of younger talent interested in moving into clean tech, green tech, and so you never know what might pop out from the ground. Of course, this is also, it will include community initiatives to kind of keep your neighborhood green and clean. So I think that's not just think of this as a commercial thing, but certainly a way in which ground-up initiatives, ground-up ideas can be tapped. You never know what you don't know, and there might be interesting ways in which from the ground up we do things differently that might be useful not just for Singapore but for other cities. Please bear in mind, we've always been sort of out there saying that we want to be a leader of the pack in terms of sustainable livability among cities around the globe. So I think that this is quite helpful. Yeah.
And from a business perspective, Wu Hong, in the KPMG proposal, you spoke a little bit about incentives for property players when it comes to green initiatives. Are your clients, is this something that they're actively searching for? I mean, things have changed quite substantially from 10 years ago to where we are now.
So if you look at the commercial buildings in Shenton Way, you can see that a lot of new buildings, right? There are also a number of old buildings, so they may not be environmental friendly or green per se. So we are hoping that what are the incentives? Maybe there's some allowance to entice all these landowner or property owner to remodify their buildings, to make it more green. But probably this will be in the next budget that we can see. Yeah. So these are important things to make Singapore more green.
And there was a lot to digest in this year's budget, and we're almost out of time. So lastly, I'd like to ask each of you if there's anything in this budget that we might have missed, starting with Vikram.
You mean that we might have missed covering?
Oh, no, there's definitely a lot to digest, and I don't think we could have done it in an hour. But I mean, that was missed from the budget speech that you would have liked to see.
Okay, what would I have liked to see? Actually, I sort of agree with Alvin's point on foreign worker levies. I mean, there's no change in foreign worker levies. And I think some of the most vulnerable sectors, like tourism, food and beverage, hospitality, they are some of the biggest hirers of foreign workers, and they got no relief on that front. And if you look at the Singapore Business Federation's annual surveys, their biggest complaint is getting workers, the difficulty of getting workers, and especially in labor-intensive type of industries like hospitality. So I think the one thing that was missing for me is some relief on foreign worker levies, at least for some of the vulnerable sectors. Yeah.
Gillian?
Well, difficult to say because I think we all agreed it was quite a comprehensive budget and very, very targeted. So I hope that there's enough there to support families. There's now an expansion of the ceiling for access to public housing, so that should help with family formation. I know my friends in civil society always say, is there more support for working mothers? And I think you've seen that in the past. So, but there's always something to watch out for when it comes to supporting families, so that they can do the juggling act between sort of income generation to support families, but also, support to be at home as well. So something in that space, I think. But that's all I can say, really.
And
Yeah, I was struggling what to say. I think that we saw the corporate tax rebate of being given, but it's not a big amount. So in fact, only benefit companies that pay taxes, right? So companies that are not paying taxes, they are really in a loss situation. They won't benefit from it. Then there are probably the losses carry backward you can use to do that. But I was hoping to see probably more incentive, like the research and development incentive for companies that they've been claiming, right? So some of my clients are saying, oh, I am doing R&D, but I'm not claiming the incentive because I don't make profits, right? So even if I claim what's the use, I just increase my losses. So I was hoping that there may be some cash payout or cash, for this company, but I don't see it here. So maybe it's something that maybe we can hope for in the next budget.
And Alvin, it seems that they really brought out the big guns with this budget, quite a significant spend, and we've also got quite a interesting deficit for this year as well. What are your key recaps and anything that you've missed that you think should have been included in this year's budget?
Well, the only word that came to my mind was women. 50% or more than 50% of the workforce is women, right? Yeah, don't seem to suddenly the kind of lost focus here. And I know there are some measures for family, but there's not much to really to encourage more women going into or more active participation in workforce. I mean, as the society turns more grey, right, in a lot of countries are already turning towards the women workforce. Because they play in my view, a disadvantaged role where they have to take care of the family and childbearing and things like that. So I think there should actually be more, especially in this case where the labour force is tightening. You are not just you don't just need to muster up your older workers. I think you have to muster up the remainder of the workers that is not in the workforce right now, which is the women. Yes.
Just 2 seconds as well. I wanted to ask you. So, 10.9 billion for the deficit this year. So quite a substantial spend.
Correct.
And what are you looking at in terms of how this is going to impact an economic recovery?
Okay, the thing is, first off, we thought it was going to be 4 billion. I think markets in some of the estimates are as high as 8. So this is, I think, well above what markets were expecting. And rightly so, because we are facing a short-term issue as well as longer-term things that we need to take care of. But at the same time, right, we also are quite mindful that The estimates, while is quite big, governments have typically been very conservative, or typically they tend to state more, but then when we come to the actual year itself, if things turn out better next year, the deficit itself, most of the years turn out to be smaller than what was put in right now, what is budgeted. So it need not necessarily have a very big impact, let's say, on at least for the current country's credit rating, right? I don't think that there will be a significant impact, and a lot of the measures are very sensible and not spending on white elephants, useless projects. So it doesn't cause a concern on, at least for me, the credit rating of the country by having this deficit that is put in budgeted.
It's equivalent of 2.1% of GDP, but it's fully funded. I think that's the point. And also, I think the government was probably preparing itself for a real downturn with the US trade tensions, remember, towards the end of last year. So it's already kept the powder dry, and then we've had COVID. So it's all available to tap. And I think the minister was at pains to emphasize this is what we do in terms of very prudent financing and putting money aside. Towards the end of the term, you also don't know what you don't know, but it's also always, this is how the PAP government plans it, that towards the end of the term there'll be enough to sort of ensure that if nothing happens like COVID, there'd be plenty to distribute in terms of sharing the fruits of success. So in this case, it's prudent and it's a fully funded deficit, and I think we can just rest easy that we're in good hands.
Okay, well, once again, thank you to all our guests for your interesting insights. That's all we have time for this year's 2020 budget announcement. And for more details on the budget speech, please visit straitstimes.com and the podcast on Money FM. I'm Rachel Kelly. Thank you for tuning in to Budget 2020, jointly organized by the Straits Times and Money FM 89.3, presented by UOB in partnership with KPMG and Reach.